Welcome everyone to the third special lecture of the Economy of Francesco School. We are finally in November, the month of EoF's 2025 global event in Italy. If you want to join the more than 500 attendees at Castel Gandolfo, there are still a few event badges available. If you're interested, please email community@francescoeconomy.org. My name is Tony Gadati, a research fellow with the Economy of Francesco Academy, and it is my honor to moderate today's session. This is the third special lecture of the EoF School, following fantastic talks by Jennifer Nadelsky and Kate Raworth. It's my distinct honor to introduce today's speaker, Esther Duflo. Esther Duflo is the Abdul Latif Jamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics at the Department of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and co-founder and co-director of the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab. In her research, she seeks to understand the economic lives of people living in poverty, with the aim to help design and evaluate social policies. Esther is the recipient of the 2019 Nobel Prize in Economics, awarded jointly with Ajit Banerjee and Michael Kramer for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. Her books include Poor Economics and Good Economics for Hard Times, in addition to more than 100 articles published in the field's most prestigious economics journals. During the lecture, please share any questions you have in the YouTube chat. They can be included in the audience Q&A we will have after the lecture. With that, I am excited to learn with all of you who are watching on YouTube, and I turn it over to the floor to Professor Duflo.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, no matter where you are. Glad to be here with you today. The topic of the lecture today, so I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and then we can open it up for questions. The topic of the lecture today that we discussed was pretty broad. It was poverty and public policy, and of course the idea is to think about how what I've learned in my work, the way I've conducted my work, might potentially be resonating and helpful in your work, no matter where your steps take you, as long as it is something to do with helping the poor live more full, dignified lives. I'm going to share some slides which are going to help us guide the discussion. Hello. So 15 years ago, I wrote a book which was with Ajit Banerjee, which I will show you here. It has a new tagline to it because we recently issued a new version of it. So I think some of you may be familiar with the book, but the idea was that it was already based on the research we had conducted till now. It was also, in a sense, based on the work of many others, and also on hope to see of what randomized controlled trials in development could become. And at that point, we tried to draw some more general lessons, but of course, we were taking some guesses from how the literature would develop. The greatest lesson, both from the book and from the intervening 15 years, was perhaps that the world keeps teaching us how to do good and how to do good research. But both the message and the messengers might not always be the ones you expect. So in order to be surprised, we need to start with prediction. And therefore, what we did in Poor Economics at the time is not only kind of summarize what was there, but also going on a limb on various issues, which was based on our interpretation of the available evidence and how the dot maybe formed a larger picture. 15 years later, it's sort of time to take stock, and as you might have expected, we got some things right and some things wrong, and some things became much sharper. So what I want to do in the intervening 25 minutes or so is to give you a few examples of how we were wrong, And there are some places where we were right, but it's kind of no point dwelling on those, and what we have learned in the meantime. So the first interesting topic on which we learned a lot was the question of nutrition. One of the things that was striking, I think, for many people in poor economics is the story of this man whom I met in Morocco, who explained to me that if he had more money, he would spend it on food. And I was surprised because he had a television and a parabol antenna, and then I said, "But you have all this stuff. Why didn't you spend it on food?" And he told me, "Well, television is more important than food." And we heard, I think, that part of what he was saying, which is television is more important than food. And it's one of the things, and we tried to rationalize that and make sense of that and kind of take him at his words. But maybe we didn't hear fully the second part of it, which was also important, which is now that he has the television, then in fact, if he had more money, he would spend it on food. Because at the time where we wrote the first Poor Economics, some recent study indirectly suggested that if people had more money, they would not spend it on food. The income elasticity of food, to use the kind of jargon of economists, might be zero or even negative. But what happened over time, as the poor got less poor through asset transfer, like the graduation programs, such as the one run by BRAC, cash transfers, unconditional, like the Give Directly program, or like many social protection programs that have since then been run by governments as well, or conditional or quasi-conditional. Researchers have found income elasticity in the demand for food that are higher than most non-previous experimental estimates, and in fact, sometimes quite high. In fact, as poor people get more money, they do, as this man in Morocco told us he would, eat more, sometimes even more than proportionally. So sometimes if you give people 10% more income, they will spend actually 13 or 14% more on food. To give you an example, a migration subsidy program in Bangladesh finds that a $7 travel subsidy to go to the city to find some work led to increase in per capita calorie consumption of 700 calories a day on a base of 1,400 for the houses they look at. So that's a huge increase. And this is not even including the food that the migrant eats. A recent study by Dean Carlin and Chris Udry reviewed a number of cash transfer programs, I think about 72 programs and 93 study of those, finding large food expenditure elasticity. Similarly, the Give Directly program estimates an income elasticity of demand for food of about 1.2 for the monthly transfers. So people do seem to do exactly like this man told us in Morocco. If they had more food, they would spend it on food. And clearly it's because some of the expenditures they were doing before were probably even more essential. So what did we get wrong there? Well, one possibility was that it's the gender, and when people get cash transfer program is often through the woman, but that doesn't seem to be the case because these elasticities are similar for the transfers directed to men or women. Some of these programs are worded in terms of investing for the future, and therefore maybe this serves as a nudge or some form of conditionality. But the Give Directly program, which is pure cash with no strings attached and presented as such, has the same impact. And the last possibility is that the cash transfer creates a space of safety. The possibility that you will always have enough on the table, and that creates the possibility of going from pure subsistence to a more fulfilling productive life. And therefore, eating more and becoming more productive is a part of it. Second example is microcredit. So the idea of microcredit at the time where we were writing Poor Economics was kind of maybe towards the pinnacle of how people were considering it, the idea that there could be a miracle of microfinance. that people will use these small loans to pull themselves by their bootstrap, and all we have to do is to make these loans available and then get out of the way. What we had predicted is that most people will not voluntarily become entrepreneurs if they have another way, and that's something that is very much confirmed. That for most people, microfinance loans mostly pays for consumption, and we didn't yet have, at the time of writing, the results from RCT in 7 countries that were subsequently published together, and which found consistently a very nil effect on consumption. Another thing that happened is an inadvertent RCT where an organization in Andhra Pradesh tried to bundle microcredit with health insurance, but people hated the idea, so 27% of clients dropped out. And we're seeing, again, very little change in their lives, business, consumption, etc., from losing access to microfinance in this form. So when we combine this study, this is work by Rachel Meagers, we find basically very small impact, small decrease in temptation code, hardly significant overall, and no effect on anything. Consumption, durable consumption, business revenue, business profit, etc., for the average person. At the time, we were cautious. We say this doesn't mean that microcredit is useless, that the idea that it's used as a credit card doesn't mean that it's bad, because it allows people to consume the way they want to, for example, to convert small streams of payment into one large lump sum good, like a television or a fridge. And this is something that they want that might be desirable in itself. The fact that there are large impact on consumption also means that there can be impact on the economy as a whole, even if individual recipients do not benefit from microcredit, simply because there are now several studies showing large general equilibrium effect, Keynesian type effect of consumption increases. So for example, when you give people cash transfer in a community, everybody benefits, even the people who do not get the cash transfer. And similarly, when microcredit was pulled out of one district in Andhra Pradesh, this had large negative effect on consumption and earnings at the district level, even though not everyone is a client, and even though we know from the other studies that clients don't particularly benefit. And this is likely to this decline in consumption that's coming from losing access to microcredit, which in turn kind of has economy-wide effects. So this is something we had not fully seen coming. The other thing we had not seen coming either is that even though very few people benefit, those who had a business before microcredit arrived, and therefore those who were already productive before microcredit arrived, did actually benefit from microcredit. In particular, at the very top of the distribution, the most productive entrepreneurs actually benefit, and the treatment effect on them keep growing over time. We went back in Andhra Pradesh in Hyderabad to study the impact 10 years after. And we're finding that for the original people who originally already had a business, they have a quite large effect by the time the 10 years have passed. They have effect on profit, effect on revenue, and they even have effect on their own consumption. So that means these people actually do benefit, but of course the people who are hurt are the people with marginal businesses that should probably have stayed away and maybe got pulled into microfinance to purchase something they wanted, but then have to kind of deal with the regular reimbursement of it to their detriment. And there is a new wave of experiments that finds precisely that. The third topic that we did touch on and that we learned a lot since then is the concept of poverty traps. This was, in fact, I mean, more than touch on, this was perhaps the central organizing theme of poor economics, is the idea that there are some people who might be stuck in poverty, and that's one reason to aggressively redistribute. However, at the time, we were very conscious of the fact that there was not much evidence of a trap, and in fact, whenever people kind of were looking for evidence of a trap, they tended not to find one. And since then, just at the when poor economics was published, we were starting to get the early result from the BRAC graduation program, which is targeted to the very poorest of the very poor. It's a package that consists of some assets, some training, and some temporary cash assistance. There was an RCT done at the time just in one country, Bangladesh, and now done in 7 countries, including India, several countries in Latin America, Ethiopia, so various continents, various settings, and which in general finds impact on consumption after 18 months, which is the end of the program when support is withdrawn, but people, of course, keep the assets, and 3 years later at the second end line. What we have since learned is that these effects are, in some settings, extraordinarily persistent. So in India, we now have measured, we have collected data after 5 years, after 10 years, and now after 17 years. And 17 years later, the people who initially got this transfer are still considerably richer than the control group. Even though the control group did increase, their wealth did increase in the meantime, and their consumption level did increase in the meantime. So the poor become less poor. Even through COVID, they went down, but they went back up again. But the treatment group increased their consumption much more. And we are seeing them varying in their activity. So they almost all start by having cows, and then they switch to non-farm businesses, and then they switch to getting more from migration. And now we're seeing them coming back, actually, the young generation, and picking back up this non-farm businesses in their village. So we see the activity fluctuating, but they are still 40% richer than the control group. So they seem to have really benefited from this original help. So they own more productive assets, they work longer hours, they earn more, they are happier, they are healthier, and it continues. The consumption per head in India are about 40% higher for consumption, 30% higher for income. Very similar to what we originally had, so a very persistent effect. The effect for income is actually even larger than what it was before. So this is a strong indication that there is something like being stuck in poverty, and therefore something like getting pushed out. And what is very interesting is that this program, perhaps because it got this evaluation in several states, it was picked up by a government, in particular the Indian government. It was generalized in Bihar first, where it's already reaching 200,000 families. We have been able to conduct an experiment in Bihar as they were scaling up the program, finding extraordinarily large effect there as well in this setting of a scaled up program. So this is quite striking. This is now becoming nationwide policy in India, so potentially reaching literally millions of people, and we are now quite confident having the potential to make very large changes in their life. First topic that is very important in poor economics is education, something which I've devoted a lot of my time to. There was perhaps the most, at the time of writing, was perhaps the most richer and the the most accomplished part of the literature was education, because most of the randomized control trial in education started in economics started with education. So we had learned a lot. So we were kind of in a good position to have a good diagnosis there. And we identified that the primary problem preventing kids to learn well in school was pedagogy. So not malnutrition, not infrastructure, not lack of qualified teachers. And we argued that one reason was a curriculum that was extraordinarily rigid and overambitious, leading to a school system that was not good at identifying talent, and did not produce any learning, really. At the time, the evidence came from the success of approaches that try to fix that, and in particular, teach the kids at the level which they are. So the teaching at the right level program that was promoted by Pratham in India and since then and expanded in countless countries in Africa, and a tracking experiment we conducted in Kenya. Since then, there has been more pieces of evidence along the same, which kind of help fill up the picture and perhaps go further than what we believed at the beginning. So what we thought then is that, there is really a problem of learning. Of the quality of learning for a lot of students. What we did not realize is that it was perhaps even worse in the sense that the school system was not able to recognize knowledge that was already in the system and to leverage it. And I'll give you two examples of that that happened later. One is early mathematics acquisition in preschool, and the other is kids who do mathematics in markets. So I worked with Liz Pelke at Harvard in the psychology department to develop a curriculum for poor children in the very early grade of primary school, so kindergarten and grade 1, or even potentially preschools, based on sort of the best that is known about the science of how kids learn math. And the idea is that kids and adults, everyone is born with intuitive sense of mathematics. For example, you can recognize that there are more red dots or more blue dots without counting them. That's called the approximate number system. Other things you can do is to orient yourself in space. So these are basic knowledge of geometry, and also count small numbers. Like you can see here, she's playing like snakes and ladder, race to the top, by counting 1, 2, or 3. So when her spinner goes to 1, she's able to separate 1, 2, and 3. From a very early age, kids can do that, even though they haven't learned the concept of 1, 2, and 3. Another thing that was known is that this knowledge can be trained, and the hypothesis that was at the time prevalent in the cognitive science literature, and that my co-author Liz Pelke definitely shared, is that if you could train the approximate number system and the intuitive, the core knowledge that we all possess, you would be better equipped to do better in formal mathematics when the time comes. So we ran this experiment where we trained the kids, and what was really striking is that the kids loved it. They progressed in very poor Indian preschool exactly at the same level and speed as kids who were used as guinea pig in Cambridge Math, which were mostly children of assistant professor and postdoc and graduate students. They also learned a lot originally in the treatment group at a bunch of math questions, both symbolic and non-symbolic. But the effect did not persist did not translate into school math. So you can see at the second end line and the third end line, very persistent effect in non-symbolic mathematics. So this kind of core knowledge, so they definitely learned something about math. But if you look at the schools that are taught in school, the skills that are taught in school, there is no effect there at all. So that was interesting because that suggested that we needed to change the way that we used this, that we designed the curriculum to make sure that the translation to non-symbolic to symbolic was done explicitly in the games, and that we would not, that the teachers didn't have to kind of try to do this transition. But it said something deeper about the Indian school system, in the sense that it said that the teachers were not able to recognize that kids knew better and to leverage it. And in a completely different setting, we found the same thing among kids who are selling fruits in markets, which you can see all over the world. And something that has always struck us is how good they are at doing mathematics. So we conducted a study in Delhi and Kolkata, where we kind of wanted to double check we were right, that the kids were actually good at doing mathematics, they were not faking it. By, for example, give you approximate change that is not quite the right change. So we sent surveyors, kind of decoy surveyors, disguised as shoppers in markets in Delhi and Kolkata. We asked them to buy 2 vegetables, an unusual quantity of 2 vegetables, and ask for the change. So that requires 2 division, 2 multiplication, an addition and a subtraction. And we first checked that, in fact, they were very good at doing that. And then we pulled them out and asked them some formal school math questions. Later in Delhi, we went into schools around those markets and we asked school children the same question. And what we learned first is that the market children are definitely the best at doing the market transaction. So this is the first, second, and third. You can see the second and third transaction, like they're correct 95% of the time. The school children are correct less than half of the time. And this really overestimate their performance, because we give them as much time as they want and as much pen and paper as they want. So they take about 15 minutes to do this calculation and their piece of paper, which would make, of course, them completely useful in the market, whereas the market children do this by hand very, very efficiently. So market children are indeed very good at doing arithmetic. On the other hand, they are really bad at doing school mathematics. You're less likely to find them able to do a division. You're less likely to find them able to do no more. Like 40% of them can do no more than recognize a 2-digit number. That means they got the subtraction wrong. 32% got the subtraction right, but got the division wrong. Whereas the school children, 57% of them are at the division level, so they got everything right, including the division. So the school children are much better at school math, but much worse at market math. The market children are much better at market math, but much worse at school math, which suggests there is no kind of back and forth between the two. And there should be, because, when you practice arithmetic all the day, every day, in a highly relevant context, you should be good at arithmetic. And this is not what we find, and that suggests that the system does not leverage their knowledge. The last example I want to give is the what we call the power of small things, or the plumbing. We had concluded poor economics by a political economy chapter, which contained perhaps our most controversial statement. The idea is that institutions with a big I are insufficient, that they don't guide policy enough. The big principles are not sufficient, that there is a lot that needs to be done in between. And what policymaker needs and lack is often guidance on how to implement this kind of policies, including the functioning of democracy. And in the intervening years, research has bolstered the case, maybe self-servingly, since a lot of that research is ours, on the importance of what I've come to call plumbing, which is that the details of policy making, on which we generally don't have much kind of principle to guide us, are often really essential. I'll skip the example to give you 2 words of conclusion before we open to questions. Ultimately, several years since poor economics have made us more convinced of a few things. We, as economists, as some tools to help policymakers understand the problems they face better. We understand incentives, the interplay of psychology and economics, the role of information, and we can therefore make ourselves helpful if we want to. And there is demand for that in the world, maybe not as much in part of the rich world now, but certainly in the poor world more and more. But policy making is not clean. It involves a lot of mudding through, and if we want to be useful, we'll have to get our hand dirty. That's an opportunity, that's a responsibility as well. From a kind of intellectual perspective, one thing that we learned is that it's not really a sacrifice to get into those details, because often the knowledge you're getting by grappling with those details open theoretical questionings that would be absent without it. Let me kind of emphasize something that we totally missed in order to finish. Poor economics does not have a chapter on the environment. There is mention here from time to time, but it was clearly not something that we consider to be a priority. Even to these days, we still, acknowledge that the poor have many more problems than the climate. However, the damages of climate change are falling directly on the poor, which are not contributing pretty much anything to it. And I think that has become clearer to us that becomes an emergency in poor countries, because climate change is already upon us. The increases in mortality will fall in places that are hot today, which is where most of the poor people live. Things will actually get better in the cold places because winter will get less cold. And poor people in poor countries are also less able to protect themselves against hot spells. For example, they don't have air conditioning and they need to continue to work outside. To finish on, Pope Francis in the encyclic, which is, a beautiful text, he asks to think about what's our debt to nature as humanity. And of course, we also emphasize, do we have a debt to the poor? So I actually kind of took upon myself to calculate what that is. And I can give you some more details on how we do it. But what we calculate is that every year, the rich countries accumulate a debt of $1.8 trillion from just the mortality damage that their emissions are imposing to the poor. Thinking about poverty today, therefore, has to be thinking about that, has to be thinking about how we discharge this debt, and what this tells us about redistribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther, for that really enlightening talk. Something that stands out about your work is how it all starts with seeing the dignity of every person, regardless of their demographic or financial status. And that for you and the research you steward, rigorous research design and econometric methodologies are not in conflict with the kind of respect for each person that allows them to go from being a research subject to really being the protagonist of their economic reality. And as we all heard in your remarks, that allows you and your team to do better economics and should serve as an inspiration and an important reminder for all of us. So once again, thank you so much. We'll turn over to the chat with questions. So first question comes from Pietro Ramallini, who asks, apart from microcredit, do you think that a universal basic income or an income of last resort is sound and workable?
So a universal basic income and an income of last resort is not quite the same thing, because an income of last resort, at least the way it's described now is, the way that I understand what this means is something that's available when you really need it. I think that's very much workable, very important, actually. I think if people knew that that's available, that would change a lot in their outset on life, because just the fact that the risk, poor people are subject to a lot of risk, and removing a little bit of that risk actually makes a big difference. And in fact, we are learning over the year that those those type of transfers, cash transfers, were pretty much absent from social policy in developing countries, which just had either public services or in-kind transfers, but they are now much more frequent, and they have been studied, and the impact are universally very positive. A universal basic income is a slightly different question because it's expensive, and then it could potentially come at the cost of other things. So the way I'm thinking about it, and we talked about it in our second book, Good Economy for Hard Time, is that in very poor countries, in particular very poor countries very affected by climate, like take Niger or Chad or Somalia or Sudan, I really see no reason why we wouldn't have for everyone a UBI that would bring everyone at the international poverty line. The reason why I think we should have that is that I told you the way that the mortality damage of climate change is so much larger than that. We owe it to them. So it's a lot of money, but it's much, 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 much less than what we owe to them by the way that we decide to consume, and therefore the emission that we continue to emit. So what we propose, we are working on a new project with Michael Greenstone and Abhijit Banerjee now, which is now tentatively called Just Economics or FAIR. We are where this is, where we did this calculation of what's the damage that rich country impose on poor countries, and we propose that if one could raise even a fraction of this money, one way in which it could be disbursed is through this small universal basic income, which would place people above the poverty line. It would of course be a game changer.
Do you have any insights or initial thoughts on how you'd make the pitch for that kind of model to policymakers for whom the incentives may not lead them to necessarily want to implement that kind of policy?
Yes, so I'm trying to make that speech, and have been kind of making it here and there. And I'm in fact going to COP in Belém in a week to make it to people assembled there. I think the way you make it is that, look, in rich countries now, a lot of people in rich countries start to get preoccupied by climate change. And you see it in the action. Maybe the US is its own special object, but certainly in Europe, there is a lot of effort to reduce emissions in Europe, and because a lot of people in Europe are very concerned about climate change, as they should be. You cannot address climate change without addressing the problem of emission in poor countries, because even though per capita the emissions are very low, and also historically they are very low, if you move to the future, the emissions in poor countries will basically hold the key to preserving the climate, because they are growing and their populations are also growing, and the OECD emissions are going down anyways. So this is without getting an inflection in the trajectory of emission in poor countries, in today's low and middle income countries, it's not even possible to make any progress on reducing the warming of the planet. Rich countries had not realized that. They always thought poor countries were some sort of footnote, but I think they're starting to realize it now. But what they have done until now, which is some combination of promises that were not fulfilled and browbeating and pressure, it's not working at all. Emissions do not go down in poor countries, and places like India refuse to do anything about using less coal or whatnot, and poor countries are upset, and no progress is being made. So the pitch to the rich country would be, okay, admit the responsibility, not even for the past, but for current actions. Stop trying complicated things. Just give money to countries to compensate them for the damage you are causing now. Show willingness to pay for your damages that you are causing. And in exchange, the poor countries could say, well, we will do climate action in particular, we could do, they could have start climate carbon taxes in their countries, or some version of it, quotas that are equivalent to that, which would be kind of the only way to really move the needle. While keeping agency with the poor countries, because if poor countries decide to put a carbon tax in their own country, then they can start getting investments to change the economy, but nobody is going to tell them, no, you have to do this and not that, and I have to be present for the ribbon cutting and or whatnot. They can focus on actually getting things done.
I think that makes sense to me. Next question comes from Joe, who's in Cameroon. Two-part question. First, could you share your thoughts on conducting field experiments ethically? And Joe has found that most development NGOs shied away from these kinds of projects. And Joe's second question asks if you could elaborate on the theoretical connections between poverty and dignity and how dignity develops.
So all experiments are always conducted ethically, in the sense that there is human subject board that are looking at them to make sure that it's done in respect of people, with the self-interest, with the best interest of the people at heart, and in respect of their autonomy and their and their choice of agencies. I feel development NGOs shy away from this usually. If that's the ethics reason why they shy away from it, is because they misunderstand them. But there are many other reasons why they might not want to do them. Like, it kind of stands in the way of their existing programming. It has logistical implications. You need to be big enough. And to be honest, most organizations should not conduct RCTs. They should just use the best available evidence, pick a good program, and run it as well as possible. And then a minority of organizations can focus on doing the experimental work and developing the toolkits that everybody else can use. It's not really like, it's like, I don't know, the equivalent of a doctor and a research hospital. Most doctors don't need to do experiments. So it's the same thing with NGOs or with governments. So it's just, we just need to, and there are more and more. What's very important is that more and more local actors, organizations from Cameroon, universities, or some NGOs, or the government gets involved in running experiment, because it should be done, with like the local knowledge of what's important. That's been something that's been maybe missing a little bit originally, because most of the expertise and the money was in the US or in Europe, and I think this is improving in the sense that there is much more capacity that is being built to do it worldwide. But you could expect that they would, and there is also, money is easier to get wherever you come from. But this is, but you can expect that it will always remain a minority of organization, as it should. Because if you already know that something works, then you should do it. Yeah.
And did you have any thoughts on his question relating to some of the connections between poverty and dignity, and how some of these programs may play a role in people's experience of dignity?
Yeah. So if you take, for example, the ultra poor program, the graduation program, I think that's kind of makes it super clear, because since these are the poorest people in every village, they are often kind of very clearly identifiable as such, and they were kind of often outcast. So people, for example, old women that nobody really wanted to talk to, and or families where maybe one person had issue with drinking, or so they were kind of looked at askance. And this is the reason why BRAC decided that they needed to do this program, because they realized that once these people didn't have dignity and were not considered by others as having dignity, then it was not possible for them to really engage into a positive project. And that's really the way that they envisioned the graduation program, was saying, okay, let's do everything to show these people and other people around them in the village that yes, they can be productive. It's just that they got into a hard patch. And I think that was quite successful.
Thank you. Next question comes from Mara in Brazil. Could you say more about the power of small things, what you call plumbing, and in particular, how to identify the small things in a particular context?
Well, that's the thing. There's no formula for that. That's what makes it plumbing. You know, when a plumbing comes to, when you are a scientist, you know, you have follow like concept and kind of logical power of deduction. Even when you're an engineer, you may have to simulate things that are too hard for you to get analytical formulas for. But you do that in, you know, you understand what the assumptions are, and you do that. But with when a plumber comes to you, they have no idea what's wrong. And they are gonna try something, you know, they are looking, they are using their experience, they are losing a little bit of what they know, they are, you know, trying something, and if that doesn't work, they'll try something else. And so that's why I'm using this analogy. It's precisely because I can't really describe it for you. You will guess it when you see it. It's about the fact that the details of public policy matter. So I'll give you one example, which makes it very clear. And it's also about plumbing, so that's kind of nice. Which is that I was involved a few years ago in a project in Morocco where a water company was trying to connect people to the water system with the help of the city government, or by mandate of the city government. And they had done a lot of engineering work to put big pipes and so on, but they needed each person to kind of subscribe, pay some amount of money to get connected to the big pipe from their home to the big pipe. So things, not last mile, but last meter. And nobody connected. So they were kind of keen to know like why they had done all this work and nobody connected. And they knew it shouldn't be money, because they were offering free loans that you could pay as, you know, with your water bill. But what we proposed to try is, but the fact is that signing up was a bit tricky. Like you had to go to the city hall and give the papers and maybe come back twice. And poor people are afraid of the city hall, where they are not well treated and so on. So what we suggested is we could try signing people up at home and see whether going to their home and taking photos of all their documents and making this process very seamless would help. And it had a tremendous effect. Like it increased the take-up from near zero to about 70%. So in this case, the plumbing was really like this last kind of, nobody had thought that after doing all these big investments in the actual project, and clearly there was a lot of goodwill, everyone wanted this to happen, nobody had thought about how people will perceive the very fact of signing up.
Perfect. Diana in Portugal asks, how willing are governments and organizations to collaborate and then apply these insights from studies to change their methodologies? And what do you see as the main priorities then for feasible actions?
So I think in the last 15, 20 years, that's one of the big changes. Like more and more people are very happy to contribute. Not all of them at all times. You know, there are some times the governments are just, you know, bad government. They don't care about the people. And there are some cases where there are huge priorities that we have, for example, electoral priorities that evidence doesn't matter. But more and more people just, you know, have read poor economics at some point in their life, or they, especially in the South, and are interested in collaborating. So we have more collaboration. One sign of that is that we are looking at the number of people who have been touched by policies that anyone in the JPAL network figured was effective through randomized controlled trials. And So we are kind of counting the scale up of policies, and today we are reaching almost 1 billion people. Not people, like some people might be touched twice, but almost 1 billion lives has been touched. So that suggests that there is a lot of interest. In terms of priorities, I'm not very good at priorities because I feel it's not really my job to define the priorities. That I think this should definitely come from the people. How will I tell you that, health is more important than education? It's kind of tough. So I think this is where the political process of the country comes up. Where I'm much better is to tell you, if you want to increase the quality of education, what you can do, what would be a waste of time, most likely, what we still need to learn, and so on.
That makes a ton of sense. Ida Marie in Denmark asks, could you elaborate a bit on the role of the super rich in all this? And how can we as individuals in richer countries counteract structures that create such extreme inequalities?
The super rich have a terrible role, in my opinion. First of all, just very, simply first order. They over time they are hogging so much of the money, and they are not doing anything very useful with it. I mean, it's useful to them, I suppose, but so if you're looking at the last several decades, a big fraction of worldwide growth was captured by the top 1% or top 0.01% or top 0.00001%, and everything that's grabbed there doesn't go to the poor. The second reason why it's a problem is that one way in which super rich people use their money is to make sure that nobody is taking it. So there is so lobbying against taxes, but also optimizing existing tax codes. So at the very top of the distribution, the tax code is regressive, so people spend less money. What can we do? I think we really need to organize to have some fiscal equity. And we've just seen it in France, how rich people are able to fight back any effort to do it. But for example, there was a tax proposed of 2% on the wealth of people with 100 million euro in wealth or more, which was just rejected by the assembly, even though something like 75% of people are in favor. So I think we really need, there is a way in which the political system is divorced from majority opinion there, and as rich people we need to in rich countries we really need to try and change that and own the system again and force governments to make these things happen.
We have time for just about 2 more questions. The next one comes from Luigino Bruni, who asks about the measure of poverty, and so much of research on poverty is about a lack of private goods or private wealth. And he's wondering about the role of common goods and public goods. If you have any thoughts or insights on how to incorporate things like public goods, the common good, within poverty measures.
I think the measures of poverty are not very interesting. They are just one thing, and in particular, I'm not very interested in trying to create an index that captures everything the way it should be. We just need to keep in mind that poverty is not just one thing. It's not just lack of consumption. It's not just lack of income. It's also lack of an ability to get an education. It's the lack of ability to, discover who you are and live your life accordingly, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, for example. It's the lack of voice in political and social processes, and so on and so forth. And the key is to we are smart enough to keep these various dimensions in mind. Some of them are public goods, some of them are private goods, some of them are the environment, the political environment, and we kind of need to keep this different in mind. No need to try to aggregate in one thing, and therefore, please continue to pay attention. If people have no access to water, that's poverty, no matter what their income is.
Yeah, that's totally right. Last question. There are members of our audience who are researchers, but there are a lot of members of the Economy of Francesco community who are regular folks who are trying to make the economy one that doesn't have victims, that allows people to live dignified lives no matter where they live. Do you have advice for the non-academics in the audience in terms of how they can take part and how they can really help steward this vision?
It sort of really depends where you are in society and what you're doing. For young people, I think discovering the world, traveling, seeing how poor people live their life and living with them is in an invaluable experience. And will color everything else you decide to do with your lives. For people who don't have the ability or the luxury to do that, it's kind of doing whatever is your bet. If you're a school teacher, being a good school teacher seems to be good enough. And in the meantime, I think we discussed playing a role in the political process, not letting the planet go away in making those decisions, not letting the poor go away in making, in deciding who to vote for and what to insist that they pay attention to.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially Professor Duflo for her wonderful remarks and insightful answers to our questions. I also want to thank Enrique and Paulo for organizing today's session. As a reminder, please contact us if you're interested in one of the last few event badges for the 2025 EoF Global Event later this month. And we'll be having our final session of the EoF School in December. To close, I just want to reflect and give an additional quote from Pope Francis in Laudato Si. He was writing about the kind of lack of clearly defined solutions for the challenges we face, including poverty around the world, and the kind of apathetic inaction that causes. He boldly implored, truly much can be done. Today, Professor Duflo has not only shown us some of the things that can be done, but has provided us with wise insights to guide our shared work toward a more just and inclusive economy. Professor, from the entire Economy of Francesco community, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Tony, you did great. I hope we're not live streamed still, but I mean, in any case, you did great. It's a public endorsement.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a delight.